Have you ever watched a horror movie and thought that was great, and then thought about it for a second and realized, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense? And that's exactly the problem at the heart of Obsession. Obsession, a surprisingly entertaining supernatural horror film that somehow manages to build an entire plot around what appears to be the world's most accessible wish-granting artifact. Today, we're looking at Obsession, the critically acclaimed 2026 movie from former YouTube creator, no, not that one, Mr. Curry Baker. What it gets right, what it gets wrong, and why the movie's central premise collapses the second you apply even the tiniest amount of logic to it. Now, before we start poking holes in it like a teenager questioning the rule of a slasher movie, I want to be clear. I actually like this film. It's got atmosphere, some creepy moments, a memorable supernatural gimmick, and it fully commits to its bizarre premise. But that premise is also where most of the problems begin. The story follows a group of friends, in particular, Bear, a young man whose life is going nowhere particularly fast, and who is infatuated with his good friend Nikki. After Nikki mentions she has lost a necklace, Bear decides to replace it for her, and ends up wandering into a mysterious shop. After deciding not to buy the necklace, he decides to purchase a magical item known as the Wish Willow Stick. The rules are simple. You make a wish. The wish comes true. Bear intends to give this item to Nikki as a friendly gesture in order to woo her. Yeah, right. Like a stick from a tree has ever been enough to make a woman fall for you. Wrong type of wood, my brother. And then things start to go horribly wrong. As Bear and eventually the people around him discover, every wish carries consequences. What initially seems to be a miraculous opportunity slowly transforms into a nightmare as supernatural forces connected to the Wish Willow begin exacting a terrible price. It's a classic be careful what you wish for setup, one that's been around in folklore for centuries. Problem is that this particular cursed object may be the easiest magical artifact in cinematic history to acquire, the world's least protected magical artifact. Let's talk about the Wish Willow Stick. In most stories involving wish fulfillment, obtaining the wish is either difficult, dangerous, or extremely rare. Let's take Big for example. Yes, Josh does just walk into a carnival, and he does come across a random wish giver, but the solution is that simple. He has trouble tracking down the artifact in order to reverse the wish. Or let's take another film for example, Drag Me to Hell. The curse at the center of the movie is incredibly difficult to escape. The entire plot revolves around the fact that fixing the supernatural problems requires increasingly desperate actions. And even then there's no guarantee of success. The magic feels dangerous because access to it isn't easy. And compare that to Obsession. A man walks into a shop. Yes, a shop. Not a hidden temple, not a haunted forest, not a cave that's guarded by immortal monks. A shop, and he buys a wish. That's it, transaction complete. Apparently, supernatural reality bending costs about as much effort as purchasing a scented candle. The movie presents the Wish Willow Stick as something extraordinary, but it's sold with all the exclusivity of a naughty keychain. So why isn't everyone doing this? This is where the plot starts unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. The film establishes that wishes actually work, not sometimes, not under specific conditions, not with a 10% success rate. They work. If that is true, then the implications would become absurd. Think about it. Somebody discovers these sticks exist. They would buy 10 of them. They would give them to family members. They would wish for money. They would wish for success. They would wish for health. They would wish for lottery numbers. They would wish for property. They would wish for anything. Even if the wishes have negative consequences, people would still be lining up around the block. Human beings routinely ignore obvious risk for far less reward. You're telling me nobody has started a Wish Willow pyramid scheme? Nobody has gone full entrepreneur and become the Wish Willow Stick kingpin? Nobody has bought an entire crate of these things? The movie acts like it is stumbling upon some hidden secret, but the Wish Willow appears to be sitting on a shelf, waiting for customers. And we learn have been available for a considerable amount of time. At that point, we're no longer talking about a cursed artifact. We're now talking about a revolutionary economic resource. The stock market would collapse. Governments would investigate. Tech billionaires would be fighting each other in the streets over magical twigs. Instead, everybody behaves as though this is a niche product. The wish economy. Let's take this ridiculous idea one step further. Imagine the implications if these sticks genuinely existed. The first person to verify that a wish has come true wouldn't simply make a personal wish and move on. They'd create an empire. You could literally become the most powerful person on earth. Even if wishes come true with horrible consequences, someone, somewhere would decide the trade-off is worth it. People make terrible decisions every day. The existence of a guaranteed wish fulfillment would become the biggest discovery in human history. Scientists would study it. Religious leaders would debate it. Governments would classify it. Social media influencers would absolutely ruin it. Within 6 months, there would be Wish Willow reaction videos. Within a year, there'd be Wish Willow unboxing channels. By year 2, there would be a Wish Willow podcast. Of course, there's always a podcast, right? Yet obsession somehow treats the entire phenomenon as though only a handful of people know about it. The consequences and the problem. Another issue is that the wishes seem remarkably reliable. In many supernatural stories, the magic itself is unpredictable. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it twists the wording, sometimes it backfires immediately. Yes, I know in Obsession what Bear wished for did go terribly wrong, but his friend also wished for $1 billion. Even in the cult classic Wishmaster movies, they managed to get this right. But in Obsession, the wishes constantly come true. That's important because it removes uncertainty. Once people know the system works, demand would skyrocket. The movie wants us to focus on the consequences of getting what we want. That's a strong theme. In fact, it's probably the strongest part of the film. But the mechanics of the wish-granting system creates so many practical questions that it's difficult not to get distracted by them. What the movie gets right. Now let's talk about the good stuff, because there generally is quite a bit. First, the atmosphere is solid. The film does a good job of creating an unsettling sense of dread. Even when the plot starts wobbling under scrutiny, the mood remains effective. The second, the central concept is timeless. The idea of getting exactly what you want might destroy you is a powerful horror theme. It's a concept that works because it's rooted in human nature. Everybody has wished for something. Everybody has imagined how their life might improve if they got one thing they desperately wanted. The movie taps into this fantasy and twists it into something frightening. Third, the film understands escalation. The consequences grow larger and larger, more disturbing as the story progresses, keeping the audience invested even when they're questioning the logic. And finally, the Wish Willow itself. It's memorable. For all the problems surrounding its accessibility, it is still a distinctive horror gimmick. A good horror movie often lives or dies by its central supernatural hook. And this one is at least memorable enough that we're still talking about it. How the movie could have fixed this? The easiest solution would have been making the Wish Willow difficult to obtain. Maybe the shock appears only once every few years. Maybe the stick chooses its owner. Maybe there is only one in existence. Maybe obtaining it requires some sort of sacrifice. Anything, literally anything. Instead, the film essentially presents supernatural wish fulfillment as retail merchandise. That's a hard sell. The movie needed barriers. It needed rarity. It needed a reason why humanity hasn't completely recognized itself around the existence of guaranteed magic wishes. Because once you establish that these wishes constantly work, the audience naturally starts asking why the entire world isn't exploiting them. Final thoughts. Obsession is one of those films that's simultaneously endurable and deeply frustrating. The core idea is excellent. The atmosphere works. The supernatural elements are effective. The themes about desire, greed, and unintended consequences are generally interesting. But the movie's central magical object is so easy to acquire that it accidentally creates one of the world's biggest logic problems imaginable. If wishes really come true, people would be buying every Wish Willow Stick they could find. Friends would be sharing them, families would be stockpiling them, corporations would be hoarding them, governments would be studying them, and somewhere, inevitably, someone would create a subscription service. Because that's what us humans do. We find something amazing, we immediately monetize it. Still, despite all of its plot holes, Obsession remains a fun, supernatural horror movie with a memorable premise and enough creepy moments to keep genre fans entertained. Just don't think too hard about the economics of magical wish sticks. The movie certainly didn't, and honestly, that's probably for the best. That's all for now. Goodbye.